safeguard duty came, we felt that in the long run, this is not a good thing. It should be a temporary phase, because in the long run, you can't afford to cripple the demand. The users who are producing in India for the rest of the world, they need to have a competitive sourcing environment. So, in principle, it is good in the short term to provide some sort of protection, but in the long term, we shouldn't kill the goose, which allows us to produce more and more steel and feed it to the market. I am reminded of an anecdote that I heard from Mr. Mayank Parikh, who was heading the marketing for Maruti, and now he's moved to Tata Motors. He narrated that when this MNREGA scheme came, and you have 100 rupees a day guaranteed for a certain number of days, etc. They found that the rural car sales picked up in Maruti, and they couldn't for any reason imagine how this was happening, because even when they looked at the impact of MNREGA and all that, people getting 100 rupees a day, how are they going to buy cars? So when they investigated and traced how this thing is happening, they found that it's not the villagers who buy cars, but it's, say there's a Kirana shop there. Now people having money in their pocket, they spend more on the Kirana shop. That person has become wealthier. Or there's somebody who's doing transportation. Those people picked up the Zens and the Altos. So it was just one or two cars per village, but then there are so many villages. And this is something which actually reflects the entire supply chain. If you recall, before the automotive industry has also gone through a recessionary phase. It's still not recovered fully. But we could see, sitting in our position between the producer and the consumer, that at a particular point in time, automotive inventories were building up with the dealers. Then it started building up with the manufacturers, because the sales started slowing down. Then it started building in, steel inventory started building up with the tier 1, tier 2 manufacturers, with us. And finally, it started affecting the steel industry itself. The recession moves up the chain till it affects the core sector. And the only solution is, unless money comes into the hands of the people who buy goods and services, the economy won't move forward. So therefore, unless we have good rains, for example, the farmers, who's 70% of the rural population, he's not going to be spending. Unless the government provides the rural connectivity, he's not going to be spending, and this will impact the chain all the way up to where we are producing steel. In fact, you may also recall that it's not very long back, 6 or 7 years back, everybody was rushing to buy mines. Today the same sort of rush is there to sell mines. So when the prices were up, mines were considered a very critical value chain component to have in your system. So people were buying mines. And today, mines are going a begging. So what could be the kind of approaches that we can take? The first, there is a huge responsibility on the government. I am not repeating things that have been mentioned in earlier sessions, but to get money into the hands of the common people, to have the cycle starting from there. Other is to improve the manufacturing base. We saw in Mr. Malay Mukherjee's presentation also that versus China, our GDP is 7 trillion, there's a 17 trillion. Our manufacturing component, our industries component of GDP is only 24%. China, it is 42%. And I also saw another statistic that the manufacturing component out of industry is only 15% in India. this has to be expanded. A few essential elements would be implementation of GST, fast tracking the infrastructure investments, because unless you have the government expenditure happening, the private sector is not going to have the confidence to go and invest and take this forward. And making sure that exemptions and protections are only a temporary phase. There has to be clear milestones for the industry to put itself on track, and where the government also should not shy away from their responsibilities, which also include giving infrastructural support. Some of the industries that have done extremely well in the country, if you look at the computer industry, then if all those protections that we talk about were there, India wouldn't be the IT services provider that it is today. We would have had very expensive computers which only a few people can afford. Similarly, if you look at the mobile industry, the kind of safeguard duties or protections were there, then we wouldn't have the connected population that we have today. So therefore it is very clear that protection is not the answer, but providing the infrastructural solutions and planning for that cost. I think Vishal Agarwal mentioned in the morning session, just to recover the cost of a steel plant, you have to have an EBITDA margin of about 6,000 rupees per ton. And over that, you want to recover interest cost, another 2,000 rupees per ton. Plus, you also expect that your shareholders will expect some return from all this investment. So, you also need to make money. I know for a fact that today, while I have mentioned some user industry perspective, I must also tell you the steel service center industry stepping back into the value chain and steel industry perspective. Today, my company is investing in adding about 2 million tons of processing capacity. But I can tell you, it would not be possible without the steel industry support. Without support from the parent company, this investment won't be possible. In this changed marketplace, customers who are making in India for the world are demanding better quality. So, every company in the value chain has to invest in quality. Similarly, you have to invest in your supply chain and logistics. So, this is a burden in the value chain that the steel producers there. In addition to just producing steel, they also need to invest in very good logistics networks as well as very good downstream facilities, which today those facilities will not be able to exist on their own. So this larger burden is borne by the steel industry, and therefore it is very important to further maybe study the issues involved and understand where we stand. I'll just conclude with one more observation, which is yesterday I was listening to a talk by an expert on GST, and he happened to compare Indian steel industry with Chinese steel industry, and he was actually a bit critical about the safeguard duty. But he said, yes, there is one of the reasons why Indian steel is more expensive is there is a large element of embedded tax which you cannot get rebates. Under GST, all the tax you pay, you get credit. But in our tax structure, and he estimated it to be about 8% of the cost of the product, which is a huge amount, the amount of embedded tax. So these are some things which we would like the government to address. So in conclusion, we need to make sure that our customers are healthy and growing, because they are competing with the world. Any protection has to be a temporary measure, and we need to address infrastructural issues within the country to make sure that our population and the economy has the capacity to recharge the economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Abraham. You made some very valid points, particularly that there has to be an improvement in the buying power of the population to set the ball rolling. And once that is done, our manufacturing sector has to improve because we are competing with the rest of the world. And that would mean that our infrastructure also has to improve, and many other areas. This is a good area for discussion. In the final session, last summing up, I'll now request Mr. Mike Barton. Is written as Sri Mike Barton. He is Chief Operating Officer of Forum Group. He's a civil engineer from Imperial College London, and he has worked in many countries: Europe, Africa, Middle East, and South America. But out of that, he done a lot of work on casinos in Macau. So we are very much interested in listening to you, Martin.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Mukherjee. Good afternoon to everyone, and I'd like to reiterate my thanks to BCCI and all the distinguished guests, distinguished speakers and distinguished guests. As Dr. Mukherjee has explained, I spent my life as a contractor and a developer in many corners of the world, and have been responsible for many civil engineering and building structures, both in concrete and in steel. China, and in addition to my time in Macau, I also spent more than 10 years in Hong Kong, so both of those either under the influence or the sovereignty of China, so I'm well aware of the Chinese mentality in many of these issues. I've listened very intently to the very interesting presentations and discussions today, and have learnt a lot. 62% of the Indian steel production goes to the construction sector. I'd like to give some thoughts on the greater use of steel in the construction industry in India. So I'm definitely in the users camp. In my previous responsibility for the design and construction of the $5.5 billion Marina Bay Sands project in Singapore, we used a combination of structural steel and concrete in the whole development, in many different parts of it. The iconic museum was an intricate steel structure which provided the lotus and the welcoming hand of Singapore. The three 56-story hotel towers were all concrete or pre-stressed concrete, but the 340-meter long Sky Park was all made of steel and lifted up 200 meters into the air. The exhibition and conference center was all in steel because of the long spans. The casino roof and other elements were also in steel. And the reason we had that combination was to achieve a very fast construction period where the whole project was finished in some 3.5 years, but also for very good economic reasons. As Dr. Mukherjee has said, I'm now very fortunate to work with the Forum Group under the tremendously creative and innovative leadership of Raul Saraf, who's known to many of you, and to his son Vidyut. Many of you will have seen the transformation of the two concrete towers of the Atmosphere project by the initial lifting of the Daya Sky Bridge just a couple of months ago, which has now transformed the project into an iconic structure of Calcutta. And for those of you who didn't see the lift, many of you will be able to see it on a National Geographic documentary that's been prepared, and maybe we can show that at Metals 2016, but we'll see. With the considerable and successful expansion of the Forum Group, we are planning many new projects. We are looking at initial costs, program and lifetime costs, and I was very interested to hear Sri Sushil Banerjee's talk earlier on the analysis that they've been doing, which I've also been following international papers on the comparisons. The reality is that even at the low levels of steel today, steel buildings are typically more expensive than concrete or pre-stressed concrete. However, they do have very many advantages, as I mentioned earlier, speed and other factors that enable the economics of the project to overcome the initial costs. However, one of the problems is that we are planning projects that are going several years into the future. And as I say, I've listened intently to the problems that the steel sector is facing, and I've seen many graphs of production and future production and past production. But at the user end, what I'm concerned about is what the cost of the steel will be. I have little doubt that the production of the steel will be available in India. And the concerns are, do we assume the costs at the present rate? I understand that there are temporary protection measures in place at the moment that will last for 200 days. But what the industry needs to know is what the long-term strategy is. Will there be protection? Will there not be protection? What form of protection? What form will that take? And effectively, a formula to enable us as the end users to look at what the cost will be with a fairly realistic assessment over the next few years. In the open market in anywhere else in the world, I could take the figures of China's dumping, which of course is not wanted here, and make our own assessments of the cost of steel. In the Indian market, that is much more difficult for us to do. And what I would say is that we, as a total industry, have to work together. Obviously, the long-term strategy needs to be defined for yourselves as the steel producers, but also to work with the users in defining the future pricing strategy so that all the users can assess whether to build that steel bridge or to put it in concrete, whether to build the building in steel or in concrete over the next few years. The design of those structures and buildings is starting now, and that's the future strategy that we need to develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I think you raised some very important points. What will be the price of steel in the future? Can anyone give a long forecast? A country which was the second largest exporter of iron ore 1 year, in 2 years' time it was an importer of iron ore. So in that sort of place, it's, I think, somewhat difficult to say with any certainty what the steel price will be. But definitely all customers would like to know what is the forecast and how it is going. But your experience with structural steel and concrete in many countries will be very useful even in this forum. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, fine, you can do it. No, it's a very difficult task to be speaking last in this line of illustrious speakers because there are no further points to say. Everything has been covered since morning. But I will not take much of your time. So what I can say is that I represent a very interesting section of the segment, which is basically both a immediate customer of the steel industry, as well the steel industry is a immediate customer. I represent the group of EPC contractors who work for the steel industry. We buy steel, convert them into the various units in the steel plant, and also we look for projects from the steel industry. So basically we are a user as well as we are a subcontractor of the steel industry. So actually Mike has covered the most point which he has done. So for 5 minutes I'll ask you to just keep aside Indian steel versus foreign steel. So if you look at it, my view is that, which was also covered in that INSDAX presentation by Mr. Sushil Banerjee, that the cement industry in the infrastructure space is a big competitor to the steel industry. What happens in India, when you bid for a job, it's done on an L1 basis. The life cycle cost of the project doesn't come into the picture. So when you're doing the design, the current cost of steel vis-a-vis the current cost of cement, aggregate, sand will actually help you decide what is going to be whether you're going to offer a steel building or a cement building. And that becomes a strategy which as a contractor, if steel was an overall winner, means they were and they could kind of keep cement and concrete and the background. Agreed, you're still using around 100 kg of cement, of rebar per meter cube of concrete. That's the thumb rule. But there is still not a very clear winner in this race. So steel prices actually will help tilt the balance between concrete and steel for an EPC contractor to make a proper bid to the. And of course, what Mike very clearly pointed out is that we bid with the current costs and make provisions for escalation. That's a very, very critical. We don't know whether we are going to be correct, but it's like to a certain extent like shooting in the dark. So we do our best from past trends, future forecasts of the economy to arrive at a ballpark price. So if steel in Indian construction has to really take a lead, then it's important that they have a kind of a big cost saving over concrete. So that would only happen when Indian steel gets cheaper or imported steel gets cheaper. So this is the only point I wanted to make as an user. So we are, as an user, we are looking at a price of steel now and in the future, so that I am able to beat concrete. If I am not able to do that, then I am going to think about a concrete building, and maximum the steel industry is going to get is 100 kg of steel per meter cube of concrete. Nothing more than that. Now, how do we probably, of course, Mr. Malay Mukherjee here and all the other people have really touched upon how do you kind of make Indian steel cheaper. We have, what I found was there were basically three major points which were made. One is cost of capital, the cost of infrastructure, and the raw materials. Now if I touch on the cost of capital, 12% versus 4%, 3% overseas. That's a tough call. I really don't think the steel industry alone is going to be able to do anything about it. Actually, the steel industry as a part of the overall Indian industry will have to kind of work together. It will not happen, and whether we are going to be able to match that levels of 3 or 4% cost of capital to beat the Chinese or the Japanese or the Koreans, I do not know. Second is infrastructure bottlenecks. It's hitting the same problem. It's hitting the engineering industry, it's hitting all the other industries equally. So again, an integrated approach will be required, and probably with the passage of time, the road networks, the railway networks will improve, and the competitiveness will come in. The last part, raw material security for the steel plants. I feel that is where a dramatic change could be made. I sincerely, there are no mining people here, I presume? No one from the mining industry, good. Actually, what I personally feel about this, you're from mining industry, sorry, I'm going to apologize to you. Actually, the steel industry worked very hard, sharpening their pencils, trying to make every penny count. But the guys who really laughed their way to the bank is the miners. They really, if you have seen NMDC's annual report, over the 2-3 years, making 30-40% margin, 50% margin by just digging out the ore, probably crushing, screening, and not even beneficiating it and selling it. So I was thinking, why was I not a miner? So if I hope the next auctions, it's my wish, I don't know whether the government of India is going to listen to me, probably not. If the first round of auctions, it is ensured that only the existing steel companies are given the mines, I think in the long run the steel companies will get a play on the how to control their costs, because the amount of savings they can do only on the steel making is rather limited. But once they have the mine along with it, that is producing at 15%, then you make some provisions for payments for something to the district mineral fund or something of that sort, and the royalties even coming somewhere down to $20. And I'm sure that Indian Steel is going to be very, very competitive with China if they have their own mines. And after the initial round of mines, I feel the next round of mines are given to the people who commit that they will within the next 5 years put up steel making capacities. So that standalone miners who are the guys actually making money should not be allowed. And as an EPC contractor, that would be the best what I can hope for. More steel capacity coming in, more jobs for EPC contractors in the Indian industry. That's all I have to say. Thanks a lot.
We are very fortunate to have Amit Mukherjee, who is heading the metallurgical and material handling independent company of L&T, with many years of experience in other areas also, to be here with us. One thing which I just said, and people can argue, that the steelmakers cannot reduce cost. There is limited opportunity for steelmakers to reduce cost. I think there could be people who may argue with you, because there are so many processes and people are finding ways of reducing cost. But one major point that you made, that cement is competing with steel, and the volatility of steel price is actually affecting the consumption of steel. I think that's a very valid point you made. I'll go there to make some.
MMHIC, it's I head only. Yeah, okay. It's my boss Derek Michael Shaw who heads it. So.
You just heard two sides of the story: the steel makers and the steel users, and there was someone in between. I think Bengal Chamber of Commerce should be congratulated to collect this group. And when I listen to the steelmakers in the morning and also now, it reminds me of a sum that in our arithmetic used to come quite often. And many of you, maybe all of you have done it, that there is a water tank and there are 3 taps to fill it up and so many holes through which water is going out. And your job is to find out how to fill it up or how to empty it out. And for the steel industry then, for filling up, we have good iron ore and things like that must be available. The free movement of iron ore, removal of duty, all these things can be. But on the negative side, duty on iron ore, there is duty on iron